Hello friends, welcome to this final lecture on the course of mechanical behavior and testing of materials. We began with a very simple consideration of what a mechanical condition is. We built on that and we wanted to quantify it. We saw how we can also express the response of the material to the imposed mechanical condition. In addition to that, we considered how the material experiences the mechanical condition we impose internally. So all these we did through some theoretical considerations. We not only considered the mechanical condition that we impose externally, but also how these conditions are experienced by the materials internally. Then we focused on the response of the material to the imposed mechanical condition. So we saw it can be categorized as elastic and plastic deformation. And there are criterions that can help us understand when this transition happens from elastic to the plastic deformation. And we wanted to, once we moved away from the elastic regime to the plastic regime, we saw that there is a specific defect that dictates this plastic deformation. And we focused on our attention to that specific defect and we gained some understanding of it. So all these were largely a theoretical consideration that we rendered to both the mechanical condition that is imposed and the response of the material to this imposed mechanical condition. Now moving away from this theoretical aspect, in the previous few lectures, we've been considering how we can test the mechanical behavior of the material. We saw for the theoretical purpose or to define the mechanical properties of the material in a general manner, we go for the tensile testing. And all the other tests are devised to address a specific application. So you are using a material in a specific application and you want to see how the material would respond in that application. So you recreate the mechanical condition experienced by the material in that application and you devise a test setup in such a manner. So that is how we moved from the theoretical consideration to the application one. Now in this final lecture, let us do some justice to the title of our course, which is the mechanical behavior and testing of materials. Even though we have been frequently using the term materials, our focus was largely geared towards metals and alloys. We have not yet considered the non-metals and how they behave or respond to the imposed mechanical condition. So whatever time we have with us, the few minutes we have with us, let us spend it on understanding, at least to gaining few insights on how these non-metals and their these extended non-metals, how they would respond to an imposed mechanical condition. Now when we consider non-metals, of course there are a huge range of non-metals that surrounds us. So these huge range of non-metals, even though we will not be considering, of course the time will not allow anyone to consider each of these non-metals individually, we categorize them. So the category of non-metals which we will be considering in this lecture are polymers and ceramics. So in this lecture, what we will be studying or what we will be considering is the response of polymers and ceramics to an imposed mechanical condition. Now, in order to understand how these non-metals or how these materials behave differently from metals and alloys, we need to understand what differentiates them from the metals and alloys. So let us begin with that consideration. Of course, these things should or might already be known to you, but in this context, since these are important, in this context of understanding the mechanical behavior, since these concepts are important, please allow me to refresh it for you. Now, when we consider metals, or when we consider elements as a whole, the way we separate metals from these elements is by considering or by associating one of the features that distinguishes metals from others. So this feature is, or this property you could say, is the electropositive nature of the metals. So when we say electropositive nature, the metals they readily give away the valence electrons and they are ready to assume a positive charge. So it is the metals, they differentiate themselves from other elements by readily or quite easily giving away the valence electrons and assuming a positive charge. So therefore, whatever crystalline arrangement we see, it comprises of this positive metal ions and there are free electrons surrounding it. And since these metal ions, they arrange themselves in an optimum manner. So if you replace this with, say for instance, hard sphere balls, and you want to arrange them in a regular manner or in a tight packed manner, you will see the resemblance similar to that of the way metal ions is packed. There is a wonderful video, a video that is totally irrelevant to the concept of metallurgy or how the atoms are arranged in a metal, and that video is purely a mathematical one, and there they would have shown how it is. I mean, of course it's not a technical, it's not a tutorial video or anything, it's just a video for fun, and in that they would have shown how just by starting with a hard sphere balls you will be able to arrive at different crystal structures. Maybe if you are interested, I could share the link for that video. So what I mean by that is, so in case of the bonds, or in case of how the crystal structure of the metals and alloys are formed, it is independent of the relation between the one metal electron or atom of one electron and the other atom. So it is not the interaction between the between electrons of one atom and the electrons of the other atoms. It is just the way two atoms or two ions could be regularly arranged. So this is what characterizes the crystal structure in metals. However, when we consider non-metals, that is polymers and ceramics, they have a different nature or different bonds that connects their atoms or molecules. So let us begin with one of the non-metals that we are interested in, that is ceramics. So ceramics, it has a very generalized description. One can define ceramics in a very generalized or in a very general manner. So that definition involves a ceramics is a non-organic. So generally the ceramics are non-organic in nature, and the other feature that characterizes the ceramics is, because of its nature of bonding, it is non-metallic in nature. So a ceramics, a generalized description for it is non-metallic and it is also non-organic. So when you have such a generalized expression, it is possible for us to have ceramics in an elemental form and also in a compound form. So we are considering one category of non-metals, and it has a very generalized definition for it or description of it, and therefore we have a huge range of materials that can be categorized as ceramics. So one can be elemental form, in its elemental form, and it can be referred to as ceramics, and then its compound form can also be referred to as ceramics. So the elemental form is again when you have carbon and they are arranged in the form of say diamond, it is again referred to as, or categorized as ceramics. And compound, of course, you have numerous examples. Now in ceramics, the bonding between the fundamental particles, so of course I'm not talking about the subatomic particles, but if you are considering the fundamental particles, say atoms or molecules, or say atoms or ions, the bonding between them, it varies. There is not a definite bonding like in case of metals. In case of metals, since they are electropositive in nature, you have a definite bonding governing their crystal structure, and this we refer to as the metallic bonds. However, in case of ceramics, since it encompasses a wide range of materials, both elemental and in its compound form, what we essentially have is the bond significantly varies with the ceramic that we are considering. So there are several different bonds that are associated with ceramics. So these bonds are largely covalent bonds, wherein you have a sharing of electrons, and ionic bond, wherein you have the exchange of electrons. So you have, in case of ceramics, when you have a compound ceramics, you would have it would comprise of molecules, and these molecules would have formed by two ions that share these electrons, and then you establish a covalent bond. In cases wherein you have the molecules, that is the fundamental particle of a ceramic, that comprises of electropositive and electronegative material or electronegative elements, then there will be an exchange of electrons that leads to the formation of ionic bond. Now you have covalent and ionic bond, so it can be either covalent bond or either ionic bond that builds the ceramics. So both these bonds are, as opposed to the metallic bonds, they are directional in nature. So these bonds are arranged in a specific manner. So therefore, you would have a definite arrangement of the fundamental particles. So definite arrangement of the atoms, definite arrangement of the molecules, definite arrangement of ions within the molecules. So therefore, as opposed to the metallic bonds, which is non-directional in nature, the covalent and ionic bonds that connects the fundamental particles in the ceramics, they are directional in nature. So therefore, because of this bonds, because of this characteristic feature of this bond, the mechanical properties of the ceramics significantly vary. So the fundamental reason for why the mechanical behavior or mechanical response of ceramics varies considerably from metal is because these bonds are significantly different. These bonds are directional while the metallic bonds are not. Now, in addition to these bonds, there are several other bonds. We will consider them in this lecture while we are considering polymers. So, but what differentiates this from the other bonds is that these are rather strong bonds. These are referred to as the strong bonds, while the ones that we will be considering in few minutes, they are referred to as the weak bonds. So the governing principle, the governing bonds that dictate the crystal structure of ceramics is covalent and ionic, and they are directional. So it is that we don't have much of a room for these fundamental particles to move. When your fundamental particles that build your overall structure, so you have fundamental particles, that is ions, that build the overall structure of ceramics, when they are positioned in such a way that based on these bonds they are positioned in a specific way, we don't have sufficient room for these fundamental particles to move, and therefore, as opposed to metals, wherein because of the non-directional nature of the metallic bonds, the ions, to be specific, are easy to move, we don't see the same behavior in ceramics. So therefore, we don't see much of plastic behavior in ceramics. Not much plasticity in ceramics. So what then ultimately what we mean by that is ceramics are brittle in nature. Now this is a way of representing how a ceramic would respond to an imposed mechanical condition, but again it's a negative way of responding it, because even though these ceramics are brittle, even though because of the directionality of these bonds between the fundamental particles, there is not much room for these particles to move, and therefore they are brittle in nature. Because of this directionality, because these fundamental particles are fixed, they offer us high strength. So even though saying ceramics are brittle is a valid statement, however, it is in a way we are negatively associating or negatively describing its property. So the other way of describing its mechanical behavior is to state that it has a very high strength. Now when we compare, for instance, the stress strain curve rendered by the ceramic to that of a metal or an alloy, let us consider just a representative curve for a tensile testing, it would be of this form. So when we say high strength, we are referring to the high yield strength, which can of course be determined by the offset rule. So for ceramics, let us use black to represent it. So you have this yield strength, and because the ceramics are brittle in nature, you don't see much plastic deformation, and ultimately the material fails. When you compare it with, for instance, the stress strain curve of a metal, we can express it in this manner. Now we have seen that there is a specific way of describing the mechanical behavior of a material with respect to this curve. This we referred to it as the resilience. So if you could recollect, when considering the tensile testing, we saw there is a specific way of describing the mechanical response to the material during tensile testing, particularly in the elastic region. When we are not focusing on the plastic region, when we are restricting ourselves to the elastic region, we can define the behavior of a particular material in this elastic region in a specific manner. That is, by considering the amount of energy the material is able to withstand before it deforms permanently. So when we are considering the mechanical behavior of the material during tensile testing, particularly within the elastic region, then it is possible for us to describe this behavior by considering or by quantifying the energy that the material is able to withstand before it deforms plastically. So this energy, we refer to it as the resilience, the amount of energy that the material is able to withstand. We refer to it as the resilience, and we saw this resilience can be calculated by considering the area under the elastic region. Now when you compare the area under the elastic region, so we used black for ceramics, so this is ceramics, and red for metal. So within the elastic region, if you consider the area with the area under the elastic region for the metal, you could see that despite being brittle in nature, the ceramics are highly resilient when compared to that of the metal. So the mechanical behavior or the mechanical response of the ceramics to the imposed mechanical condition can be understood by considering the high strength that it offers to the plastic deformation, and the high resilience that it offers by withstanding the huge amount of energy that we impose on them. So when compared to metals, the ceramics are able to absorb sufficient amount of energy or significantly high amount of energy without exhibiting a permanent deformation. So these are two aspects, like in addition to the brittleness of the ceramics, that is, of course, ceramics are brittle in nature. And apart from that, when we want to discuss the mechanical properties of ceramics in relation to that of the metals, we see that they exhibit high strength, and they also observe a significant amount of energy without exhibiting a change permanently in its dimensions. Now, considering that these ceramics do not exhibit much of plastic deformation, the studies on the mechanical behavior of the ceramics are rather it's not as homogeneous or as spread out as metal, but it is rather restricted to a specific aspect. So what I mean by that is, since the ceramics do not exhibit a sufficient degree of plastic deformation, then it is not possible for us to study the yield criteria that we considered for metals, because we are not much interested in it, because the ceramics in any case do not exhibit a sufficient degree of plastic deformation. So therefore, any discussion on the yield criteria proves to be meaningless from a physical standpoint, because once you move away from the yield criteria, once you go beyond your yield criteria, ultimately a ceramic will fail. So you don't have any or significant amount of plastic deformation, so there is no point in considering the yield criteria. Secondly, since again the ceramics do not exhibit much plastic deformation, we cannot study the dislocation behavior on how these plastic deformations are, or why these plastic deformations are restricted from the perspective of the dislocation. There is not much dislocation that is happening. There is not much, rather, nucleation or propagation of dislocation that is happening in the ceramics. So any theoretical study that we conducted on the dislocations in metals and alloys cannot be extended to ceramics. Therefore, what essentially is done in considering the mechanical behavior of ceramics is that large focus is given to the failure of ceramics and how this failure occurs, particularly how the crack propagation, or rather the crack nucleation and propagation occurs in a given ceramics and how we can enhance it. So when we want to talk about the mechanical behavior of ceramics, the focus is largely on the failure, understanding the failure of the ceramics, particularly the nucleation of cracks, the propagation of it, and how we can enhance the overall stability, or how we can enhance or avoid this nucleation and the propagation of cracks. And since in this course it is not the focus of this course to consider, or we have not considered the failure aspect of the material extensively, considering the mechanical behavior of ceramics as a whole is out of question. So in this course, even for metals, the focus was largely on understanding the behavior, not on the failure of metals. And since in case of ceramics, the study of mechanical behavior largely is confined to the failure of materials, we cannot consider the mechanical behavior of ceramic as extensively as we did for metals. So here we have a justification for why we are spending only few minutes on considering the mechanical behavior of ceramics. It is primarily because in case of ceramics, when we talk about the mechanical behavior, it is restricted to the failure of ceramics and how to avoid it or enhance its life. And in our focus, or in our study on metals and alloys, or so far whatever we have seen, the focus was largely on understanding the response of a material, understanding the mechanical behavior of material. And therefore, since the mechanical behavior of ceramics is confined to the failure aspect of it, we have a reason for spending only few minutes in discussing the mechanical behavior of ceramics. So basically, ceramics, when you impose a similar stress condition to it, you see it is of high strength. It is able to absorb a huge amount of and relatively high amount of energy before exhibiting a plastic deformation. And since it is not able to exhibit a plastic deformation as a metal would do, or as a metal would exhibit, particularly due to its nature of bonding, we refer to ceramics are brittle in nature. So with this discussion on ceramics, let us move into the other category of nonmetals that we are interested in, that is polymers. So the polymers, the way the polymers are, or the way we characterize the polymers, is when you have a specific unit that ultimately leads to a formation of macromolecules. So you have a unit, a chemical unit, this chemical unit that repeats itself to form a macromolecule. And this macromolecule, they are in the form of chains, and these chains are related or linked to one another. So ultimately we have linked chains of macromolecule, and this is what a polymer is. So polymer is a linked chains of macromolecules, and each of the macromolecules is formed by repetition of a chemical unit. So of course there are several organic polymers, and therefore the chemical unit will be of simpler composition. So you have a chemical unit that repeats itself to form a macromolecule, and this macromolecule is in the form of a chain, and there are several chains that are linked together, and this ultimately form the polymers. Now this chemical unit, the repetition of which leads to the macromolecule, is what we refer to as the monomer. So it's the monomer that repeats itself to form the macromolecule, and the macromolecules are linked in chains, ultimately leading to the formation of polymers. Now when we consider the atomic bonds that exist in a polymer, so you need to consider two atomic bonds: the atomic bonds between the monomers, and the atomic bonds between the chains. So you have a intra-chain bonding and an inter-chain bonding. So within the macromolecule or the given chain, there are several monomers, and these monomers are attached with one another, they are bonded with one another, and apart from that, the chains are also bonded with one another. So you have intra-macromolecule bonding or intra-chain bonding and inter-chain bonding. Now the bonding between or intra-chain bonding is largely a strong bond. So therefore it can be ionic or covalent. However, the inter-chain bonding is characterized by, or the chains are linked with one another through weak bondings, and these weak bonds, the examples of the weak bonds are polar bonding, van der Waals bonds, or van der Waals force of attraction, and something similar to the hydrogen bonding. So you have both stronger and weaker bonds that are associated with the polymers. So within the macromolecule, within the chain, you have strong bonds that connect the monomers, and the macromolecule themselves are connected with one another through the weak bonds. So when we say weak bonds, you have polar bonds. These are hugely due to when you have a molecule with negative charge concentrated at one end and the positive charge concentrated at the other end. Because of this, you establish a dipole, and when you have a similar molecule, then because of this dipole that has been established, the positive charged end will be close to the negative charged end of the other molecule. So this is what establishes a polar bond. So when you have one molecule and the positive charge is concentrated at one end and the negative charge at the other end, you establish a dipole. And when you relate, or when you attempt to relate this molecule or this dipole of a molecule to another molecule, then the way it arranges itself is it will be associated, the positive end of the one molecule will be associated with the negative end of it. And this way of associating, or this way of bonding, is the polar bonding. This is because of the way the charges are being distributed in a given molecule. Now, when these charges, or this partial positive, or in case of the accumulation of charges, when as opposed to the accumulation, when you have partial positive and partial negative, because of the way the electrons are moving, then it leads to the formation of van der Waals bond. So maybe you can have, and similarly the hydrogen bonds also, they operate in a similar principle. So you can have have an overview of, or have a go through on what these different weaker bonds are. And for the sake of our discussion, what we need to understand is, in case of polymers, you have monomers that leads to the formation of chains, and these monomers are interconnected with one another through the stronger ionic bonds. And the macromolecules that are formed by these strong bonding of the monomers, these macromolecules, they are chained to one another through these weaker bonds. So you have strong macromolecules connected by weak bonds with others. So the mechanical property, or the mechanical response, when you impose a given stress, or when you impose a given condition to a material, particularly polymers, it is the weaker bonds that exist between the different macromolecules that operates in the interchain region. This is what governs the mechanical behavior of polymers. So what we essentially have is, we have a definite a characteristic feature for the polymers. We have a characteristic structure for the polymers. This structure, it comprises of monomers, macromolecules, and the interlinking, or the overall linking of the macromolecules. Monomers, chain, and the multi-chain that leads to the formation of polymers. Within a given chain, you have strong bonds, and across the interchain you have weaker bonds, and it is the weaker bonds that govern the mechanical behavior of the material. Now, given this particular structure of the polymers, it is possible for us to have numerous monomers. Now, since the monomers has a definite structure, or rather the polymers have a definite structure, and it all depends on the monomers, the way they are arranged in the macromolecules. So it is possible for us to have numerous monomers, and these numerous monomers can be arranged in different manners within a macromolecule, and these macromolecules can be linked in various ways across themselves. So you have the possibility of numerous several monomers constituting the macromolecules. So these monomers can be there can be a wide range of monomers, and these monomers can be arranged, or they can be bonded in a different manner to establish a macromolecule. So there is a several possibility for a given monomer, and there is also a numerous possibility of how these monomers can be bonded to form the macromolecules. And in addition to that, there is also a numerous possibility of how one macromolecule can be related to or linked to another macromolecule. So ultimately what we end up having is we have a wide range of, because of all these possibilities, the possibilities in monomers, the possibilities how they are connected within the macromolecules, and therefore the possibility with the macromolecules, and also how these macromolecules are connected with one another. Considering all these different variables, you have an exceedingly wide range of polymers. So categorizing it and understanding the behavior of it will in itself require a huge, or it require a specific course, and therefore we also have another justification for why we did not spend a sufficient amount of time to understand the mechanical behavior of polymers. So we have two, seemingly reasonable arguments on why we did not spend much time on ceramics and polymers. Ceramics, it does not show much mechanical response. Polymers, we don't know which polymers to consider. We have a very wide range of them, and therefore we are restricting, or we are only spending few minutes on understanding, or just to gain a generalized understanding of how a polymer would respond to a given mechanical condition. I don't know if you agree with this justification or not, but it seems to be one, or there seems to be one. Yeah. So now, depending on the number of chains, again there is also another variable, that is the degree of polymerization. So this is another variable, that is depending on how many the number of chains that are interconnected to form the overall polymer, you have the degree of polymerization. Of course, these will also influence your mechanical behavior. So we have several variables, and because of the several variables, you have a wide range of polymers, and therefore we will be just talking about the generalized, very general behavior of a polymer to imposed mechanical condition. Now, what we essentially have is we have a polymer, and the fundamental part of it, the repeating part of it is the monomer, and the fundamental part of it is the macromolecule. And the macromolecules are related through the weaker bonds, and these weaker bonds are the ones that govern the mechanical behavior of the material. Now, since these are weaker bonds by nature, because how these bonds are formed, since they are weaker in nature when compared to the stronger bonds that operate within the macromolecules, it is possible even the ambient temperature is able to overcome this weaker bonds. So given that the bonds between the interchain, or the interchain bonds, the bonds between the chains are weaker, and since they are critical, these interchain bonds are critical in governing the mechanical properties, it is even possible that the ambient temperature is able to overcome these bonds, or these bond energies. So the thermal energy at ambient temperature is sufficient enough to overcome these bonds. So what this essentially means is that these polymers, because of the nature of bonding between the two macromolecules, they exhibit creep behavior even at room temperature. So what we mean by that is, since these bonds between the macromolecules are weak, the thermal energy that the polymer gains even at room temperature is sufficient to overcome these bonds, and therefore these polymers at room temperature, they behave like a high temperature material, or the room temperature is a high temperature for these polymers, and therefore they exhibit a creep behavior. So if you could recollect, creep behavior is not the high temperature material behavior, the creep behavior is a time dependent behavior. So therefore, since even the room temperature is an high temperature for the polymers, these polymers for a given constant stress, they exhibit a time dependent strain. Now, to understand this creep behavior, or rather because of this nature of the response to the mechanical condition, it is hugely difficult for us to understand just by analyzing or just by macroscopically viewing the deformation of a polymer to differentiate the elastic deformation from that of the plastic deformation. Since as opposed to the conventional deformation, the conventional I mean the metal-like or alloy-like deformation, since the polymers, they behave in a different manner, since they exhibit a behavior that is similar to that of what we observe in an high temperature, it is difficult for us to distinguish the plastic deformation from that of the elastic deformation just by macroscopically viewing the response of the polymers to the imposed mechanical condition. However, we can understand the elastic or differentiate the elastic deformation from the plastic deformation by again considering not the stress versus strain plot, but the strain versus time plot. So, since at room temperature, because of the nature of the bonds between macromolecules, since it's weaker, these are connected by weaker bonds, the room temperature is high temperature for most of the polymers, or generally it is the high temperature for polymers, and at high temperature, it is not the stress versus strain that we are focused on, or that does not gives us the features or the behavior that we are interested in. It is the time dependent strain exhibited by the material for the given stress is what is of interest to us, or that is what we do during the creep testing. We adopt the similar condition to understand the mechanical behavior of polymers. And when you do that, and since it is difficult for us to distinguish the plastic and elastic deformation under such a condition, under a time dependent strain, what we essentially do is we consider a mechanical condition that involves loading and unloading. So what we mean by that is similar to that of the creep test that we carry for, or that we perform for the metals. We begin a setup, we consider a setup wherein we begin imposing a load, a definite stress, we begin imposing it instantaneously, unlike stress strain or tensile test wherein the stress is gradually increased. In case of creep test, the definite amount of stress is suddenly imposed. The same condition or same test or same setup we consider to understand the mechanical behavior of polymers. So similarly, we begin by introducing a definite amount of stress, and once you introduce this definite amount of stress, there is a definite amount of strain. So this we refer to that as the instantaneous creep. Now for our consideration, since the time taken for the instantaneous creep is so small when compared to all the other time periods, for instance the transient creep period or steady state creep period, when compared to all these other time periods, since the time taken for the instantaneous creep or the instantaneous strain is so small, we can begin by considering the transient creep. So when you plot the strain versus time curve for the polymer, and the moment you introduce the stress of sigma, there is an instantaneous strain, and that we can represent it as epsilon naught. And whatever strain that further occurs because of this imposed load will be a part of the transient creep that we saw, and this transient creep is otherwise known as the decelerating creep because the rate at which the strain occurs, it decreases. So therefore, we are imposing a load on a polymer, a definite load, a constant load on a polymer for a given period of time, a very small period of time. So therefore, there is an instantaneous strain, that is epsilon naught, and there is a transient creep behavior wherein the strain for a given duration of time gradually decreases. So this is similar to what we observe in case of metal. Now we want to see or differentiate the plastic deformation from the elastic deformation, because it is difficult for us to understand in case of by macroscopically viewing it, and therefore we began unloading this particular, or we just unload this particular stress that we have been imposing. So we just relax the particular stress that we have been imposing. So therefore, in case of metals, or when you consider or perform the similar test, in case of metal, we saw within the elastic range what would happen is that the metal would immediately go back to its original form at ambient temperature. Again, now these tests are being performed at ambient temperature. So again, even in the ambient temperature, that is the room temperature, you have the polymers exhibiting a creep behavior. Now in this condition, what you essentially have is when you relax the imposed stress, there is a sudden decrease in the strain exhibited by the polymer. However, after the sudden decrease, there is the change in the strain is gradual. So the polymer takes significant amount of time to get back to its original state. So what we essentially see is you are imposing a definite amount of stress over and you are allowing the material or the polymer to deform over a definite period of time. So till this time here, that is TL, you are imposing a constant stress, and therefore till this TL, in addition to this instantaneous strain, what you have is a gradual increase in the strain. So you have a gradual increase in the overall strain. Of course, the rate is decreased, but there is a gradual increase in the strain. We are in the transient creep stage. And now at TL, when you relax the load that you have imposed, when you remove the condition that you have imposed, then there is a noticeable amount of decrease in the strain. There is some decrease or some instantaneous decrease in the strain. However, the subsequent decrease are gradual in nature. So this decrease in strain is generally equal to that of the instantaneous strain epsilon naught. So this sudden decrease in the strain, once you unload your sample, this is equal to the instantaneous strain, and this is what is referred to as the time independent strain. And the relaxation of the rest of the strain, it happens over a period of time, and this period of time is referred to as the retardation. And the retardation period. So what you essentially have is, when you consider loading and unloading of the polymers for a constant stress, you would see that there is a sudden decrease in the strain. However, it is only for a certain limit, and the subsequent decrease in the strain once you unload the sample is gradual, and there is a retardation period during which, this is D and A and so on and so forth. So you have a retardation period during which the strain will completely diminish and the polymer will get back to its original position. So this way we can see that when the strain completely diminishes and when the material gets back to its original state, or this polymer gets back to its original state, once you have completely unloaded your sample, then you can say you have elastic, what the material has experiences the elastic deformation, and such material we refer to as the viscoelastic polymers. Now, as opposed to these viscoelastic polymer, supposing if the polymers have experienced a plastic deformation, what you would observe after the unloading event, after TL, is, of course, there will be a sudden decrease in the instantaneous elastic strain, and there will be a gradual decrease in the strain, but this strain or the gradual decrease will not, or the gradual decrease in the strain will not reach the x-axis, it will not reach the zero value, but after a certain point it will become constant. And this strain here is the plastic strain. So what we have seen is, in case of polymers, because of its nature, even the room temperature or the ambient temperature will be a high temperature. So therefore, the behavior that we can study is not the stress versus strain curve, but rather we can understand the creep behavior of the polymers. So what we mean by creep behavior is the time dependent strain exhibited by the polymers for a given mechanical condition. So in such a condition, when we study the creep behavior, it becomes difficult for us to understand or distinguish the elastic behavior from that of the plastic behavior. So therefore, when you consider a loading and unloading experiment, then what we observe is that when you load to the polymers to a specific point. And when you impose a constant load and allow the polymers to deform for a specific period of time, say TL, and then you unload the mechanical condition, then what would happen is there is a section of the strain that gets reversed instantaneously, and that strain is often equivalent to that of the instantaneous strain that we see in the initial condition. And when, as the time progresses, if the polymer it eventually gets back to its original shape, then what we essentially have is an elastic strain. Then such polymers we refer to as the viscoelastic polymers. Now, in combination to this elastic strain, if there are some plastic strain or plastic deformation has occurred in these polymers, then the strain will not go back to zero. There will be a constant strain that will remain even for a very prolonged period of time. So that means the material has exhibited or experienced plastic deformation. So such material we refer to it as the viscoplastic materials. So what we understand is, in case of polymers, the mechanical behavior is studied by considering the time dependent strain of the materials. So depending on the nature in which the fundamental particles are bonded, the overall response of the material to an imposed mechanical condition varies. Now, in case of ceramics, since it was directional in nature, even though they were of high strength, even though it was difficult for us to disrupt this directional bonding, they were also brittle in nature, so they did not exhibit any plastic deformation. However, in case of polymers, because of the way the fundamental particles are bonded with each other, particularly because the mechanical behavior is governed by the weak bonding between the two macromolecules, we have a behavior that is similar to that of the high temperature behavior of metals and alloys. Even at room temperature, the polymers exhibit high temperature behavior, a behavior that is similar to the high temperature behavior of metal and alloys. And therefore, we have two categories, that is viscoelastic behavior and the viscoplastic behavior of polymers. And this viscoelastic and viscoplastic behavior can be understood when we consider the strain versus time plot for a given period of time, and we consider also both loading of a definite stress and also unloading of it instantaneously. So by these tests, we will be able to distinguish viscoplastic behavior from the rest of the viscoelastic behavior. So these are few fundamental concepts that would help you understand or differentiate the mechanical behavior of metals from that of ceramics and polymers. With this, I would like to wind this course up, and if you have any questions regarding this or any other topics that has been covered and forth, you are free to reach me. So I will try my best to answer these questions. So goodbye. I hope these lectures would have gained some new inputs or would have helped you gain some new inputs. Goodbye.